Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Tuesday, July the 29th. I'm Zach Ewing with Scott Rabalais and Reed Darcey, a couple of our writers covering LSU football this fall. And that means that starting tomorrow, July the 30th, they will be very busy and probably very hot on some mornings as they are out
Yes.
Well, you don't get to go out every morning, but when you are out there, it will be hot. I'm sure of that. LSU begins its fall camp. I've said on the show before how much I hate the word fall camp because there's nothing fall about outside right now, but it's preseason camp, let's say, tomorrow, exactly 1 month from its season opening game at Clemson on August the 30th. And so, it's time to kind of dive right in, guys. And I don't know, we'll kind of go through position by position and look at some of the storylines that we have our eye on and what to watch for in this camp. But overarching picture, Scott, what is the feeling that you have going into this LSU season, and what are you hoping to learn over the next month?
The feeling is, I think, pensiveness, a little anxiety mixed with high expectations. I mean, everybody feels there's a lot of talent on this team, and that there's a lot of some experience in some areas, especially at a great position like quarterback. I mean, a lot of schools would love to have the quarterback situation LSU has with Garrett Nussmeier, and a guy like Van Buren as backup, who's coming in from Mississippi State. But there's also that trepidation of will LSU be able to make the college football playoff facing another tough schedule this year, and that's obviously the overarching thing. So what we're hoping to learn is does LSU look like a championship caliber team, a team that, more to the point, can go in and win at Clemson on August 30th.
Reed, how about you?
To me, the word that I keep coming back to is pressure. It's just like, it just feels like there's a lot riding on this season, in terms of how much LSU has invested in this coaching staff and in this roster, and I just imagine the possibilities of, what happens if LSU loses the opener on the road at Clemson. How's the fan base going to react? What's the narrative going to be coming from that game? Is it going to be the same old story that's been the last 5 years with LSU losing openers and having pretty much the air sucked out of the season right at the start? So there's a whole lot riding into that game against Clemson. There's a whole lot riding into this season. I think we'll learn a lot about Brian Kelly and exactly what he's capable of and what this program is capable of right now, pretty early on this season.
Yeah, I think that you guys nailed it. It's the high expectations, and that comes with the amount of money LSU is paying its coach, Brian Kelly. The amount of experience they have returning at quarterback will ratchet up expectations, and the amount of money that they committed to the NIL fund and bringing in this top-ranked transfer class, or number 2 ranked transfer class now, whatever it is. I mean, the point is the time to win is now. LSU missed out on the 12-team playoff last year. They had not been in the 14 playoff before that since winning the national title in 2019 season. This is like, it's go time. I mean, I think the fan base is impatient. I think everything feels like it's coming together. Now we got to see it. And that starts, guys, with Brian Kelly. I mean, make no mistake. Like, I don't know if I would say he's on the hot seat. I don't know if that's quite the right term, but the fingers are at least on the thermostat. Like, people are getting ready to turn it up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a hot seat either. I mean, a hot seat means to me that if things don't go well, you could get fired this year. I don't think LSU's in that position, and I don't think Brian Kelly is warranted being in that position. They've won 29 games in his first 3 years, and they've been reasonably good and had a Heisman Trophy winner and played in an SEC championship game. I mean, there are a lot of things to point out that say the program is making progress, or they're at least doing reasonably well. But then you go into next season, it's like, well, the next season could be a whole different story. It's so much. It's like the whole college football playoff experience now itself with the 12 teams. It's so much pass fail. It's like, as I said going into last season, I think I was proven right. If you make the playoff, you've had a good season. If not, like Clemson did, even though they lost their first game. If you're not, then you failed. And especially if you're a program like LSU, if you're Texas Tech or if you're Southern Miss or somebody like that, you're being like, well, if you make the playoff, great, that's awesome. Indiana last year, LSU, the expectations are a little higher because only Alabama. I'll say this before too. Only Alabama has won more national championships in the 2000s than LSU has. So that's something to be said for that too. So that's part of the reason the expectations are high. But yeah, not hot seat in terms of if he does, if they don't make the playoff, he gets fired. I don't think it's anything like that, but it certainly builds up for next year. And it's like, and as you said, the expectations. If you do all this, you've paid all this money to Brian Kelly. You pay a lot. You open the checkbook for him to bring in a great staff, a Louisiana-centric staff at that, and open the checkbook to get all these transfers and players in the portal, and it still doesn't work. Then what? Then where do you go from here as a program? That's why to Reed's point, it's just there's so much pressure, just in general of trying to build to that point where you can say, LSU is a national player again.
I think Brian Kelly is in a weird position in that, at LSU, he's won enough to avoid going on the hot seat heading into year 4, but he hasn't won enough to really satisfy anybody, I think. I totally agree with y'all. The buyout talk, the hot seat talk is way premature. Brian Kelly's buyout is prohibitively expensive, especially now when the belts are tightening around the country and everybody has to be mindful of money now that all these athletic departments are sharing revenue with their athletes, right? It would take something pretty calamitous this season for Brian Kelly to actually go on the hot seat. But I think it's just again, so much is riding on the Clemson game and how they start, given the fact that he is putting so much pressure on this game and he is giving it so much weight. He spent all of media day and all of his, stop at the Baton Rouge Rotary Club talking up that game, talking about how important it is and how his team is ready for it and how for the first time in his 30-something year career that he's put this much attention on one game, and that's the opener. So he really wants that game. LSU clearly wants that game. And so I think they'll get held to that standard of showing how exactly they put that pressure into that game. If it backfires, then you should get quite the reaction, I think. So,
yeah, I mean, I think LSU fans and alumni and even the school itself sees itself as the inner circle of college football. They are part of the very top echelon. But if you go 5 years without making the playoff, I don't know if you can say that, especially if you put all your eggs in one season's basket and it still doesn't work out. I don't know if you can say that. So I think it kind of, this season may very well tell us if LSU belongs in that upper echelon. And they're going to have to do it consistently to stay there, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, Rab, if they can't do it this year, if Brian Kelly can't do it this year, then when? That's really what it comes down to. And I agree. I mean, I think, as we open this into a discussion about camp, I don't know how much we're going to be able to tell from camp as far as, is this a championship contending team? I don't know if the offensive line looks great. Is that because the defensive line is not very good? Or is that because you play this game in training camp with every football team at every level. You just don't, they're playing against themselves. And so it can be a little bit difficult to tell. However, I will say one thing that Reed, you hit on it right off the bat, like the emphasis on that first game and sort of the bravado that BK is showing, like, hey, we can go win this game and they're Death Valley Junior and all this stuff. Like, I don't think you do that if you're not pretty confident.
Yeah, I think he's confident in what LSU has. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Garrett Nussmeier is back, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have all these transfers and, the by all accounts, the number one transfer portal class in the country. That's not to say that, all those transfers are going to hit. The transfer portal is kind of a fickle kind of process. If it guaranteed you anything, then Ole Miss might have gone to the playoff last year. So there's a whole lot of risk involved here. Even though with the returning quarterback and the returning production and Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins are back and there's a good freshman class. there's still a whole lot of risk. There's still a whole lot of uncertainty, and I think we'll get an answer to our questions in camp about the position battles and how it's shaking out, and that'll give us clues into what the team looks like. But overall, when you look at the most important positions like the O-line or the pass rush, the edge rushers, it's really difficult to get a feel for exactly how good they are until the actual games start. And so that's going to be a month-long process of trying to figure that out.
Okay, so let's kind of go through some of those positions, and we're going to do this pretty quickly today just because we have a month to talk about this, quite frankly, and we may have full podcasts on some of these position groups. But you mentioned the number one reason for confidence is Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, he is absolutely a luxury to have a proven commodity back under center, a guy who not just is returning, but is returning from a really good season where he threw for 4,000 yards. He looked the part. Where there's some bumps in the road, yes, but Rab, the dream here, and this is what we have on the slide here is like, what's his ceiling? And that's such an important question for this team is, does he have to have a Heisman campaign, a Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels second season in Baton Rouge campaign? No. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. That would be great if he does that. Then the ceiling for this whole team is higher. But I think he does need to get better, maybe just with consistency.
Yeah, so there were some bumps in the road last year. There was the midpoint of the season, the Texas A&M loss, where just he made some bad decisions, some bad throws. And Garrett's not afraid to. Garrett thinks he can put a football through a keyhole. He's got that strong arm, and he showed it in the Ole Miss game. That fourth down pass he threw to Aaron Anderson, I think. It just led him. I mean, you go back and watch that pass, and he's not open when he throws it. But he has confidence in his arm. There were some ups and downs. But hey, very comparable, if not better than the first season as Joe Burrow was a starter in 2018 and Jaden Daniels was a starter in 2022. He's the leading returning SEC passer in terms of yardage and touchdown passes for over 4,000 yards and 29 touchdown passes last year. So there's a lot to commend Garrett Nussmeier and to think that the ceiling, winning the Heisman, there's a lot that goes into that, and one thing is capturing the imagination of the voters. So, and maybe someone else does that in a way that he doesn't. But it's the ceiling is he can be as good a quarterback as anyone in the country, and the expectation should be that he progresses from 2024 to 2025 in a way that's similar to Joe and to Jaden.
The two ways.
Go ahead, Reed.
The two ways that I think he can improve. One is cutting back on the turnovers, and two is improving as a vertical passer. You saw it towards the tail end of the season last year. Once Chris Hilton came back from injury, LSU's offense had that vertical threat added to it, right? It struggled to find that all year until he got there. Nussmeier hit 7.7 yards per attempt, which was 12th in the SEC last year, and he completed only 36% of his passes over 20 yards. That's per Pro Football Focus. So that wasn't very good. It wasn't very good enough last year. It got better once Chris Hilton gets back. Now LSU needs those receivers to be on the field and be more consistent in order to have that element of his offense. Because if it has that element, then the ceiling of the offense it is a lot higher. And this year, even if and when Chris Hilton gets injured, LSU is not solely relying on him as the only deep threat of the offense. It has two transfers who can really help out in the event that he has to miss time. Barian Brown and the Kentucky transfer, he's one of the top return men in the country. He's got 4.2 speed, 4.3 speed. He should be able to be a deep threat that LSU can lean on. And then Nick Anderson, the transfer from Oklahoma, he didn't play much last year because he was injured, but in 2023 he averaged 21 yards per catch. So one of the top rates in the country. So I'd expect LSU's offense to be a little more vertical this year, not only because Chris Hilton is presumably healthy right now so far, but even if he does go down, LSU has a couple of options behind him to help Nuss, use his arm strength a little more.
That is what we call a professional segue. Young Mr. Darcey knew we were going into skill players, and so he's given us a good breakdown. I did want to just throw one more thing in about the quarterbacks, and you mentioned it at the top, Rab, but Michael Van Buren, speaking of luxuries, to have a backup quarterback who has significant starting experience in the SEC, man, oh man, now listen, if Garrett Nussmeier were to go down long term, we're having a different conversation that has to change all expectations. But if it's a half or a game or 2 games, or I mean, like Michael Van Buren can step in and win you a football game in the SEC.
Right.
Now he didn't win a lot at Mississippi State last year, but he showed that he could compete. And I think that's a luxury too. So I wanted to mention that. But talking about the skill players, Reed went through, Aaron Anderson, Chris Hilton returning. You've got all these transfers, Nick Anderson, Caden Durham at running back too. He was hurt last year for most of the year and still put together this really good season, Rab. I think he's certainly a headliner here too.
He's a very promising running back, and he got a lot of respect on the preseason All-SEC team and the media voting at SEC Media Days. He was like one of the second team running backs. So I was like, that's pretty good. I mean, you're a little concerned there because Trey Holly left, has transferred to Southern, and was he going to play? There was still some question, was he going to play? But you're down to like 4 running backs, so they've got to get good play from Durham and Harlan Berry, coming in with all his accolades, but the wide receiver core looks really, really stacked. I mean, with Anderson and Brown and Chris Hilton, and then to the tight end spot too. I mean, Trey Green, I'm just floored by his talent, and then you got the I'm laughing because Brian Kelly flubbed on Bauer Sharp's name at the Rotary Club. What did he call him? He
called him Blake.
Blake, yeah. So you got to have one of those from Brian leading up to the season. But Blake Sharp is a good player, and I'm sure Brian Kelly likes him in a uniform. So there's those things because LSU likes they like Brian Kelly's offenses like to use the tight end. So just bristle. If the running backs stay healthy in general, I think they're in pretty good shape. But you're right. Going back to your point about Van Buren, he could win you a game. He could go out there and finish a game for you if Garrett, got hurt, and hopefully he doesn't, and or start you a game in the right circumstances and win a game. So all would not be lost if that happened for LSU this season with him as a backup.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'm glad you brought up Trey Green because the tight ends are a part of this conversation. Kind of looking at last year's stats, like if you look at touchdowns from scrimmage, Kyron Lacey led the way with 9, then Caden Durham had 8. Josh Williams, the other running back who kind of got a lot of the goal line carries, he had 6. Aaron Anderson had 5. And then the next guy in touchdowns line of scrimmage, Trey Green, who had 4 with just 13 touches. So, extrapolate that over a full season. This guy could be special, particularly in the red zone, inside the 10. That kind of a target could be a huge deal for this offense and finishing drive. So I think how he looks is a big part of this camp for me because you want to see him sort of stand out now that he's not playing. He's not worried about other sports anymore. He's not worried about basketball. This guy is going to be a focal point of this offense, and I want to see him look like it over the next month.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about him a lot over the next month, just because he's the type of guy who, in practice, he stands out not only physically, but he's the type of guy who just makes highlight plays. He makes tough catches. He made a lot of them in spring. He was all over the field in spring. Every time you looked up, he was catching a pass from Garrett Nussmeier. So I'd expect Trey Green to get a lot of attention in the lead up to the season, and then he should take a next step, going forward. He's the kind of guy he can line up out wide. He can line up in the slot. He can line up tight end. We'll see exactly how much he's improved as a blocker. I think that will go a long way into terms of trying to see exactly how many snaps he's going to play, how much he'll be on the field. And the combination of him and Bauer Sharp should be about the same as what LSU had last year with Mason Taylor and Trey Green, the 1-2 punch. I think people, if we want to talk about the run game a little bit, I think we kind of overlooked it a little bit. Last year, if you remember in the preseason, LSU lost Mac Markway, their run blocking tight end. He transferred to Nebraska before the season started. And so they never really had that physical presence in the run game from their second tight end that they really needed in order to help the run game. And the run game, as we all know, struggled pretty heavily. So having that physical presence, that blocking guy could really help things in the run game as well. But I think that's another big question that we're going to try to answer as much as we can in preseason is how is the run game doing and how can the tight ends help in that regard?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we'll see how those guys are used. And we've painted fairly rosy picture of this offense so far. You got Garrett Nussmeier, you have all the transfers at receiver joining, Aaron Anderson and Chris Hilton. You have Caden Durham back at running back. You have Trades Green and his potential. But there's a big but, and the big but is the guys with the big butts. The O-line. I mean, it may not be fair to say this whole season could hinge on whether LSU can find the answer at these 5 spots, but I don't know that it would be unfair to say that. I mean, especially on the offensive side, they've got to figure this out. Brian Kelly expressed some confidence in the group at SEC Media Days. Whether that's just coach speak, and I mean, he's not going to go up there and say, "Oh my God, our O-line is a mess." So I don't, again, in fall practice, are you going to see for sure, are these guys dominant? I just want to see them settle on a rotation, Scott. Because that to me means that they know who the guys are and they can get some cohesion and some rhythm together.
Yeah, you don't. To me, maybe Reed would disagree, and that's fine. You feel like Tyree Adams is going to be a starting left tackle. You feel like Braylon Moore, the transfer from Virginia Tech, is probably going to come in and move DJ Chester to left guard. The right side of the line, is going to be Paul Mobinga starting at a guard. It's going to be Bo Bordelon. Carius Kern is a freshman we've heard about a lot. Right tackle, Josh Thompson, Weston Davis. So there's some guys. Yeah, they've got to. I don't think they have all the answers. I'm sure they don't going into camp that they hope to have by the time they play Clemson. And this is huge. Look, it's. I go back to what made Nick Saban's team so successful at Alabama. And when he was at LSU and won the national championship, it's not. He didn't reinvent the game. They were very, very good always in the interior lines on offense and on defense. And this is where the tail of this team. It's great to have a quarterback like Nussmeier back. It's great to have receivers like the Andersons and Barry and Brown, and the tight end like Trades Green, and maybe a running back like Durham. But boy, you got to have the guys up front, and they've got to be better at run blocking this year than they were last year. Got to be for this team to be a championship team. So this is. I feel like you have you have a very good handle on where they are with these skill positions and quarterback. But boy, you've got to answer that big question mark on the offensive line, or this is not going to be a team that makes the playoffs, in my opinion.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Brad. But we were expecting Tyree Adams, I think, at left tackle, expecting Weston Davis at right tackle, at least to start. It could change. I think it's a positive sign if LSU kind of goes with one group and then sticks with it throughout camp. I think that's probably one thing we can look for to see exactly how many pieces are moving in and out in terms of to see exactly how settled this thing is. But the thing that I think about on the offensive line is that last year, LSU had one of the best pass protection offensive lines in the country, and that really helped Garrett Nussmeier again, unlock that vertical passing game once Chris Hilton got back. So LSU always kind of had the two elements that you need in order to have the deep part of the passing game in your offense. It had the good offensive line that could give Garrett Nussmeier time, and it had the quarterback with the arm strength and the arm talent and the accuracy to put it deep. This year, we know it has Nussmeier, the quarterback, and we know it has the receivers, a bunch of different guys who can win deep. But does the offensive line, can it give you enough time? Can it give Garrett Nussmeier enough time to connect with those receivers deep? I think it's a huge question. It's one of the big swing questions for this team. Is it going to be something that's going to be holding this defense back, or can it holding this offense back? Excuse me, or can it be good enough? Can it be strong enough to give LSU what it needs to reach its ceiling on offense? So we'll see. This is probably not going to be fully answered in camp, but we can get some clues and we can read some tea leaves and try to figure it out exactly how it's going to look. But we won't know for sure until LSU goes to Clemson.
And conversely, fans shouldn't push the panic button if the offensive line, if we report or people say coming out of camp like this, the first week or so, it hasn't come together yet. They have time. They have a month, so it's going to be a work in progress.
Yeah, I like what both of you said there. I mean, I think if you're a fan who follows training camp updates, but you don't know what to pick out, like you can get overwhelmed by, so-and-so made a play on defense, but so-and-so made a play on offense, and this looked good, but he was shaky and he was up and down, and again, this is LSU versus LSU, so somebody's good play is generally somebody else's bad play and vice versa. So it can be difficult to pick stuff out. But I would say Now, again, like you said, Rab, the first 2 weeks, I wouldn't worry. They should try out different rotations at offensive line. They should figure out who fits where and who's best where. But I would say you hit about the midpoint of August when you're 2 weeks from Clemson. You want to start to see those reports where, Wilson will tweet out or put at theadvocate.com/LSU in his practice observations, like, here's the 5 who lined up with the first team. You want to see that be pretty consistent over those last 2 weeks, because that means that they figured out, here's our tackles, here's our guard, here's our, is DJ Chester a center or a guard? Where do the transfers fit in? All of this stuff has been figured out. They're comfortable with it. And then those guys can work on their cohesion. And that's where you get a good first game. If you're still mixing and matching those last 2 weeks, I would be a little more concerned. So that is
agreed. And it may not be. And the flip side of that is the offensive line they start with against Clemson, which is critical because Clemson supposedly got a really good pass rush. May not be the offensive line that carries them most of the season, the combination or the starting lineup or whatever. So that's if you hope, for LSU's sake, it needs to be, but there's no guarantee it will be.
Right, and injuries will happen too. I mean, the offensive line, they're definitely going to happen. So you do want to have depth. But I would just say, if you're just following fall camp, those last 2 weeks, I'd like to see some consistency in who's playing where and some confidence in, this is the best 5 we've got. Let's go to battle with them. That's kind of the offensive side of the ball. Defensive side of the ball, I think there's a chance LSU's defense is quite a bit better, guys. A chance. I mean, there's some volatility on this side of the ball. And to me, that starts with a couple of the guys in the middle who, are going to be back from injury, Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks, how they come back and how quickly they get back up to their peak form, especially with Harold Perkins, who's, quite frankly, his peak form was 3 years ago. Can we see that again? That's going to be a big swing for this team too, Reed.
Yeah, and Harold Perkins is going to be playing star. Well, we know that at least to start. We'll see if that changes throughout camp. It's always a question. What position is Harold Perkins going to be playing? How will LSU use him this year? Turns out it looks like it's going to be star, at least to start. We'll see if that sticks or not. But I think the talk about the defense is that Blake Baker has more athletes, has more playmakers at his disposal, right? Having both Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins in place, having a brand new secondary, essentially having a couple new edge rushers that they got from the transfer portal, one in Florida State, Patrick Payton, the other from Florida, Jack Pyburn, and one from Nebraska, Jamari Butler. It's really been overhauled, especially on the edges and especially at the second and third levels. So it's going to be interesting to see how Blake Baker kind of puts together the most cohesive unit and tries to figure out where exactly the best places are for all these new pieces. We know the kind of the most important thing for a Blake Baker defense is generating pressure. And a lot of that, I think, is going to fall on the shoulders of Patrick Payton. He was great in 2023. He was not so good in 2024. Which version of him will LSU see? I think we can get a clue in fall camp to try to see exactly how he's doing in his one-on-one reps, see if he's making any plays in team drills. So that should give us some kind of clue as to what kind of pass rush LSU will have. And I think that's the number one question that I'll be trying to answer in the next month or so, because I think we're kind of underlooking the fact that LSU is losing both Savion Jones and Braden Swinson. It has to replace both of those guys. And I think at times we kind of underrated exactly how impactful they were on last year's team. So that's going to be a big question mark. That's going to be something they're going to have to replace. And a lot of it's going to fall on the shoulders of Patrick Payton.
Yeah, I mean, some of those big uglies inside, I mean, like they play underrated roles because they're not necessarily making a ton of plays themselves, but they're soaking up double teams. They're doing whatever it takes to allow other guys to make plays, Rab. So, if we can expand this to that discussion about the D-line, there's some names here. Like I do think that there's reason to be optimistic.
There is, but we got to see, it come together. This is kind of like the offensive line. This has to be a strength of LSU, and right now is a little bit of a question mark. To me, on defense is so much, and we can talk about this with the secondary as well. The new players in the secondary, there has to be chemistry. There has to be trust. The players that you're going to help. If this guy's getting double teamed, that someone else is going to fill the gap, right? And make the play because you're occupying two blockers. So, for example, so it's all that. There's a lot of that about defense, a lot about attitude and motivation and drive, and it's just you got to see it come together on the field, because I think this is the area where, yes, LSU has clearly, Reed rattled off the names. They've clearly assembled a collection of talent. But that's what Ole Miss had last year, and they didn't make the playoff. And they had an experienced quarterback coming back to a very similar situation to LSU. So they would never Ole Miss doesn't seem to me was ever able to get past the assemblage of talent and make that a good team. And that's where you've got to be really good on defense. You can go back to the Chinese Bandits, the 1958. That was the third string. Okay, that was like they were the backup guy. But they instilled this sense of pride and cohesion in them, and it made them a force to be reckoned with on the team that is beloved in LSU football history. So these guys don't have to be the Chinese Bandits. They do have to be better on defense than they were last year. I think they were ranked right in the middle of the numbers, right, like in the 60s in total defense and scoring defense. Pretty average. Certainly not great, but not abjectly bad like they were in 2023. They got to take a step forward. And if this offense is as good as we expect it to be, then maybe they can be a defense like they were in 2019, which was great, which was good, but it wasn't the defense of 2003 or the defense of 2011 when LSU won and reached the national championship game. So this defense just has to be, I don't know, top 30 defense, top 40 defense, I would think, and it starts at the defensive line, like it starts up front on offense.
I mean, look, 2 years ago, this defense was so bad that anything was going to look like an improvement, and it did.
It did,
but it's still, like you said, middle of the pack. Like middle of the pack, probably not getting you into the top 3 in the SEC. Probably not getting you into the college football playoff. I think it's going to have to be better. And we can talk about the secondary too, because I think this is one area where it really should be better. You have DJ Pickett you brought in, who was one of the top-rated freshmen in America, who looks like he's going to start or at least play a lot. You have a whole glut of guys at safety. That's going to be something to watch over the next month, is who can win those starting safety spots. But I think you bring in this kind of talent, and it's one of these iron sharpens iron situations, Reed, where the guys who emerge from this and are LSU starting 4 or 5 guys in the secondary, like they should have a much better unit here.
This is the group I think that's gotten the largest influx of talent, over the off season, and just of any position group on the team, because when you think about, what LSU was putting out last year versus now what they have to put out this year, you got Mansour Deline at corner. You can pencil him in the one spot. He's a proven commodity. He's got versatility. He can line up at the outside corner spot. He can play a little safety. He can play a little nickel. He can get in the box and be physical and make tackles. I'm really high on him. I like the kind of player he is. He's looking to get to the NFL this year. So I think I'd expect a big year from him. And then the other outside corner spot, probably going to be a 3-way battle between DJ Pickett, Ashton Stamps, and the Florida transfer Jakeem Jackson. We'll see exactly who can nail that down, but they can rotate. They're going to be injuries. So I expect DJ Pickett's going to play quite a bit, no matter whether he gets that starting spot or not. And then safety is really interesting because it's pretty much a wide open race, and you've got 5 guys that are really competing for that job. You've got 2 transfers, AJ Halsey from Houston and Jamarcus Cooley from NC State. They're in the mix as well. They're power conference starters. And then you've got the 3 returners that are also going to be vying for a starting job. That's Jordan Gilbert, Javian Toviano, and Deshaun Spears. So it's going to be interesting to see those battles and how they shake out. I think once we see that exactly again, similar to the offensive line, how much does it change? I think that can give us a big clue into how confident LSU has in the new pieces it's brought in and the ability for the coaches and the staff to find the right blend and the right spots for everybody. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Talking about things you want to see in preseason camp, Zach, I just snuck a peek at LSU's depth chart and their roster, and they now list DJ Pickett as 6'5". I don't think I've ever seen a 6'5" cornerback. I want to see. Nope. They said he was 6'4" in recruiting, right? I want to see how tall he really is. If he's even like 6'3", supposedly he's tall and has a great wingspan. and is a great talent.
For somebody like me, 6'4" and 6'5" is like this either way.
So we're going to see. Hopefully, we can measure him up with someone who we have kind of a good peg on.
Get Glenn West standing up next to him. Let's see.
If I may, Zach, I want to ask Reed a question. Again, when LSU is using Perkins as the star, you think they're still going to have 5 defensive backs on the field at the same time, or are we going to see Whitweeks and another linebacker and Perkins and then 4 DBs? What do you think will be the predominant lineup for LSU when Perkins is playing?
So when Perkins is the star, he's going to function as the 5th defensive back. You're going to have 2 outside corners, 2 safeties, and then that leaves you room for 1 linebacker, I think. So he's functionally the star. Is just for people who are unaware. It's a Blake Baker type of position. It's a guy who's basically a box safety / a nickel, and Harold is suited for that because he has the speed and the athleticism to drop into coverage, cover tight ends, cover slot receivers. Maybe he's capable of doing that. He did that in his sophomore year, but he can also come down on the edge, line up and really go after the quarterback that way. So the star position gives him that versatility that he wants and that LSU wants to have him in, because he's probably not, your inside the box, inside linebacker.
Well, we've seen that, right? We've seen that, and that didn't work.
We've gone down this road plenty of times. We've had this conversation. It feels like deja vu. He's going to be as the star, which is like a box safety type of hybrid position, and basically that extra defensive back where he can drop back in coverage and get in the box and make plays around the line of scrimmage as well. It really gives him a chance to show, both facets of his game.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned the rotation in the secondary. The only difference between that and the O-line is that, like, you're going to rotate some guys in during the game and change formations and things. The O-line, you're generally going to want to keep the same 5 guys out there 90% of the time. So I think, but to that point, the depth in the secondary should be much improved, even if it's not the same guys out there all the time. Like, they should have many more playmakers. Just when you throw Pickett and Delane out there, to me, those 2, you start with them, and then you got some guys coming back from last year who may not even see the field as much as they did last year. That right there is a sign that depth is much improved.
And Rob, I should mention that second linebacker is probably going to be either Devon Keys or West Weeks. I'm expecting to be one of those 2 guys.
Right.
So we'll see.
You could have multiple weeks. You could have a full fortnight in the linebacking crew.
Don't you want to say? You want to see all? And their youngest brother is a freshman on this year's team. He reclassified, I believe. Isn't that right, Reed? He reclassified so he could play with them. Hopefully against SLU or some La Tech or something. We see all 3 weeks on the field. Yeah,
we could get them all 3 out.
It's going to happen at some point. The weeks package. You can call it the weeks package.
Training camp. We should certainly see them all out there. We need to get Hillary and Michael, our crack photographers, on the case to look out for that photo, because we could have the triple weeks package.
That'd be awesome. That'd be pretty awesome. Speaking of Whit Weeks, Brian Kelly said at Media Days, and we asked Whit, who was one of the 3 players LSU brought. They brought Nussmeier and Hilton and Whit Weeks. Is he ready to go? Is he full speed? In his Harold Perkins, and he said both of them. Yeah, he kind of said they're both on a pitch count, but they can do everything. I want to see that too. I want to see that they're out there doing as much as you would expect them to do, especially from the start of camp, because obviously Harold had the knee injury way back in September in the UCLA game, and then Weeks got hurt, of course, in the bowl game against Baylor. So a much more recent injury with the broken leg. So those were both serious injuries, and they need them full go. Again, like Zach said, doesn't mean you can't rotate out of the game and put somebody else in those positions, but you want to see them full go in practice and see how good they look. Are they moving? Are they doing all the lateral movement and speed and that sort of thing? There'll be something to watch too, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because that's one of the challenges of having Clemson as your opener is you better be ready to go. Clemson's going to run down that hill. You better be ready to run out there with them and play right away. And so that's kind of where I want to wrap up here. And we're going to talk about this. What's 32 days from today, 31 days from the open of camp, 1 month exactly, July 30th to August 30th. We'll talk about it probably every single day between now and then, certainly every podcast. It's Clemson, and we've referenced it already several times in the last 40 minutes. But the fact that Brian Kelly is going out of his way to say we're doing things differently this year, we're taking it head on. We're not going to, like some coaches would say, it's just another game and we have to prepare the right way. And our next opponent is always our most important opponent and blah, 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 blah. Not this year, not BK. Like, he's putting all of the emphasis on this Clemson game. And we've mentioned this before. That could be a great thing. The downside is if you then lose it, you got to pick yourself back up pretty quickly. Now, they should beat Louisiana Tech the next week anyway, but you've got Florida coming in. Like, you can't act like the season's over if you lose it. But I do find it fascinating that this camp is going to take on that Clemson flavor. Basically, I mean, they've got the logo in the locker room, as everybody discussed during media days. It's going to be the talk of camp every single day.
Yeah, and it's already the players are already kind of jabbing at each other. We saw Brian Kelly, his Death Valley Jr. remark that he made at his speech to the Rotary Club. ACC media days, I think, was a few days after he did that, and a couple Clemson players were asked about it, and they kind of took the high road, and then the clips circulated of them taking the high road, and then Weeks kind of went on Twitter and shot back at those players some kind of way. So it's already started. It's already underway. It's hard to overstate exactly how important this game is. It's like LSU can lose it and they can still make the playoff, but that's going to be really, 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 really difficult, given how tough the SEC 8-game schedule always is. So it's going to be the talk of camp. Brian Kelly's going to be stressing it every now and then. It could work out, and if it does, then everyone's going to get excited. It's all wheels up. But if it doesn't, then you're probably going to get the reciprocal of that in terms of frustration and anger, probably from Brian Kelly. I don't know if he'll punch a table this time, but he might have to find a new way to express frustration, because there's going to be a lot of it if they lose.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see that late in the season where ESPN will say, oh, here's the FPI percentage of making the playoff with a win versus with a loss. You don't see that in week one, but I would be curious to see if ESPN has something like that. Like, because if LSU wins, it feels like they're suddenly better than 50-50 to make the playoff. Like, at that point, you feel like they should. But if they lose, does it go all the way down, into the teens or 20s, where you're like, you're going to have to fight an uphill battle and there's only a 1 in 5 or less chance of this happening? I don't know if the difference is that big in week one, but it feels that big. And so it's I don't know. It's going to be super interesting. Rab, have you ever seen anything quite like this where so much emphasis was put on an opening game?
I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast. It reminds me of 2011 when it was number 3 Oregon against number 4 LSU. That was a neutral site game, though. That was played at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. So LSU didn't have to go to Eugene and play that game. And LSU won that game. And, of course, that put them on a path to go undefeated all the way to the national championship game, which, of course, they lost to Alabama in that rematch of the game of the century. So, but it just feels even bigger. Recency bias is a real thing. So I will state that up front. It just feels bigger than that. This is my 33rd year covering LSU football. I'm glad and sorry to say. And I don't remember an opener that felt bigger than this one, because of the expectations, because of the disappointments of losing, because the heightened emphasis on making the playoff. Again, last year, Clemson had a really good season last year. They won the ACC. They made the playoff. They lost in the first round, but it was better than they had a couple of LSU similar seasons to what LSU's been having. Some people say, okay, Clemson's going back, and then some people are saying, they're one of the teams to beat this year going into it. They got a great quarterback in Cade Klubnik. They've got some great receivers. They got some great pass rushers. They're obviously the pick to win the ACC again. And you got to go over there. If this game was in Baton Rouge, which Clemson comes here next year, you'd be feeling differently. You'd be feeling LSU is the favorite, and Clemson justifiably is the favorite. I said this last year, and I feel the same way. I don't think anyone's going through the SEC undefeated. So if you feel that way, in 8 games, 7-1 is the best you're going to do. Then if you lose this game, that doesn't give you any margin for error, because you got to go to Ole Miss, you got to go to Alabama. You've got Florida at home, who's showed some improvement. Obviously, you could easily lose 2 of those games and still feel like you had a good season if you win that first game. It gives you a lot more margin for error. There's very little if you don't win this game for LSU. to start with. That's why it's so big. And as Reed said, you can recover a 12-team playoff. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to go 11-1, but you can't expect to go worse than 10-2 and make the playoff. Maybe someone will sneak in at 9-3. I think if they expand the playoff to 14 or 16 teams, that'll happen. But this year, you can't expect that. So that's why this game is so big.
Zach, I wanted to ask you, how big of an underdog do you think LSU is going to be?
Actually, the line's already out, and I believe it's Clemson by 2.5, if memory serves. I can look that up real quick.
So on a neutral site, LSU would be favored, or be pick 'em, or
yeah, be a pick 'em, or maybe even Clemson by 1.
Okay.
Until the advantage in betting has actually been lessened over the years. It's probably only 1.5 to 2 points. So, it'd be pretty close. Actually, now that I'm looking at DraftKings, so it could vary sportsbook by sportsbook, but Clemson's a 3.5 point favorite. And obviously the difference between 2.5 and 3.5 is big in betting because so many games land on that 3. So, Clemson's the favorite, and I think rightfully so. And but again, I think one unique thing about this opener is LSU is hyping this up themselves. This is not the outside hype. I think that LSU Oregon, and correct me if I'm wrong, it felt a little bit like it was more outside, like, hey, it's the West Coast new money power versus the SEC old money power, and we're going to see who's not. This is LSU doing this in large part, and Clemson's sort of like standing back and saying, okay, yeah, we know it's a big game, but Clemson's doing the more traditional thing where you sort of let the hype speak for itself. LSU is advancing the hype, I think. So that's different. And then, the other thing I would say is I think Clemson's a good team. I will be very surprised if Clemson's not in the playoff hunt. Same thing with LSU. But think back to some of these other openers where, like Florida State loses to Georgia Tech in Ireland last year, and everybody wants to jump to conclusions, and Georgia Tech is a title contender and all these things. Well, it turned out Florida State was abjectly terrible, and that game didn't mean nearly as much as we thought. That can happen too. LSU loses to Florida State 2 years ago and the sky is falling. And then you find out, well, that year, Florida State was one of the best teams in the country. Wasn't a bad loss at all. So you can draw faulty conclusions early. But having said that, I do think as we look forward to training camp, guys, and I'll ask for your final thoughts, but like that is the theme of this training camp is the countdown to Clemson.
Yeah, I've never seen an emphasis on a game like this. In 2011, the emphasis was dealing with Oregon's, fast-paced offense, which was so unusual, and they did more preparation for that than they usually did for because you're trying to look at the whole, get ready for the whole season. But they've put so much focus on it, and I kind of see where this is coming from, because I kind of, looking back on it, felt sitting in Allegiant Stadium last year for the LSU USC game in Las Vegas that LSU they were kind of waiting for USC to fold, and USC obviously turned out not to be a great team, but they didn't fold, and they made some clutch plays, and LSU didn't, and LSU ended up losing by a touchdown. I think they're trying to avoid that kind of attitude this year. Only once in this 5-game losing streak, only once did I feel like LSU was the inferior team, and that was in the game in Orlando in 2023 when Florida State was really good, and came this close to making the 4-team playoff with the quarterback got hurt. But against Mississippi State at home, they should have been the best team. Against UCLA, both games, against UCLA, and then the Florida State in both games rather, and then the USC. I felt 4 of those times LSU should have been the team. Should have probably won 3 at least. So this does not feel like that. This feels like they're on par at best. So LSU's got to be really on their game to play. So you got to have that mental edge. If this is what they think is going to give them the mental edge, then I'm all for it. Obviously, it sets them up for a lot of ridicule if they don't win the game, right? But it's why not? I say why not go with this attitude, because they didn't have that killer attitude Brian Kelly's first year in the Superdome against Florida State or against USC last year in Las Vegas.
It is
a risk. Time to talk about that. Reed, your final thoughts?
It's a risk, just because LSU I think has so much more to lose from this game than Clemson does. If Clemson loses, it's like, okay, we're still gonna go whatever 7-1, however how many games they play in the ACC, they're still gonna go 7-1 in the ACC, and we're still gonna be in the mix right at the end, for the ACC title game to try to get that automatic spot in the playoffs. So Clemson can afford to lose this game. I think they'll be all right no matter what. But LSU, I don't think LSU can, because I just don't see a path to them, going 7-1 or 8-0 in the SEC, and the margin of error is so thin. So it's going to be just so interesting to see just how LSU just that game. It's just gonna be that game. How they look right at the start in the first quarter, and how it goes, and how they respond once Clemson gets it to them, and then the aftermath of it. It's either going to be wheels up on the season, and everyone's going to be so excited, or it's going to be like the balloon, the air going out of a balloon on the season, like it's been the last 3 or 4 years. Where things. They lose that first game, and then everyone's like, all right, here we go again, So it's hard to overstate how important the game is, and then it should be interesting to see exactly how it plays out.
Well, to use your analogy, before we see if LSU is going to go wheels up, plane's making that slow turn onto the runway right now, and it starts tomorrow. So we are starting the month-long countdown. We will be with you every step of the way on the LSU Sports Insider podcast and online at theadvocate.com/LSU or in your morning advocate. And so keep it locked to these guys' coverage, and we'll be back next week to talk more training. Actually, we'll be back later this week. We're going to get to talk to Brian Kelly and some players tomorrow. We'll be back with some thoughts about that probably Thursday or Friday. So keep it locked to the podcast feed, subscribe to the YouTube channel, all that good stuff. And until then, for our columnist, Scott Rabalais, one of our LSU football writers, Reed Darcey, I'm Zach Ewing. And thank you for watching the LSU Sports Insider.